Hi, I'm Samuel Varghese, and this is Tools for Storytelling. In this episode, my friend Keech and I will be talking about 5 common mistakes of student films, all of which we have been guilty of ourselves. Let's take a look.
And action.
So what is the first among the common mistakes in student film projects?
There's a convenient saying for it. It's failing to plan is planning to fail. What this means, typically for student filmmakers, is just not doing the pre-production homework, not doing the paperwork that lays out your shooting days for you. The 3 pieces of paperwork you can't leave home without. One, it's just a schedule. Schedule out your time to the minute. I mean, as specific as you can get with this thing will help you. Are you going to stick to it precisely? No, but you need to know that you've got a cutoff for when you need to get out of whatever location you are or what scene needs to be finished when. Because next thing you know, a 3-minute scene can turn that you need to shoot in like an hour suddenly turns into 3 hours because you didn't know how long you needed to be there. And you thought, oh, we can just do a little more, do a little more, do a little more. And so your first act of a short film will be fantastic. Then everything else needs to be shot in 20 minutes. The second piece of paperwork would be your shot list. Now, this one, probably the most common that actually gets done. This thing needs to be its own separate document. It needs to be in very specific and accessible language. It needs to just be clean formatted so it's not confusing. And if you can, line it up with your schedule so you know which of these shots are happening at which times. So coordinating those 2 pieces of paperwork and a storyboard. A shot list is all well and good, but it's not specific enough. You really need to know what your shots are going to look like, and you need to know as the artist what you want your art to look like. Because I've been on shoots with and without a storyboard behind the camera, and it is night and day. Everything, the end product, and how efficiently you move on site.
What would you say to the student who says, but I can't figure out what I want the shot to look like until I get there and I'm in the moment and we're with the actors and I'm feeling, the groove or whatever the case may be, and what about like those spontaneous inspirations that sort of come up in the moment? I don't want to just kind of get rid of all of that.
Make sure in your scheduling your time to put in cushion for if you get inspired in that moment for a new angle to shoot from, or if this actor does something really interesting with a different part of their body, with their hands, with their feet that you want to capture, budget in extra time for those just in case I get inspired. But the first is, well, I work so much better when I'm in the groove. Get out of that habit immediately. I'm sorry, there's nothing to help that. If you know you're an on-site inspiration kind of person, again, budget time for that. But get in the practice of at least having a what you need storyboard. You need to at least have, okay, we need to see this line happen and this line happen and we need a reaction here, and have the basics at least plotted out. Because if you can't do that, I'm sorry, but no one's going to want to work under you. So that's a little bit of a suck it up, buttercup.
The need to plan doesn't go away. And so it's got to happen somewhere. And so if it doesn't happen during the pre-production phase like it ought to, then it's going to come back and get you during production, and that's going to throw out the production. And then that's also going to cross over into post-production as well. It's so much more satisfying to be in the editing room going like, I'm so glad how this, to see how this turned out. It turned out the way that we wanted it to, that we planned for, opposed to, we really wanted X, but instead we just got some lousy, feeble version of it that doesn't communicate the thing that we wanted to communicate.
The smoother your production phase is, the more precise it is, again, the easier your life is going to be in post. There's one project in particular that a group of mine shot totally by just the seat of our pants, and that created a literal 20-hour stint in the editing lab for me on the deadline, and just some miserable color correction. Just the most hellish, how do I make this not look like they're swimming in a pool of dirty water? sort of stuff. And again, it's all because we sort of said, oh yeah, we'll shoot here, on that day. And that's all the planning we did. And we show up and all of a sudden, oh God, I didn't realize we needed all these shots, and I didn't realize that we needed to have these moments in between and these transitions. And all of that came back to bite me particularly. So from a guy who's been spurned by this process, please, for the love of God, do your paperwork. And I guess a fourth thing to have totally lined up from square one before you ever touch your equipment is your locations set and squared away, and scout it. Don't just say, oh, well, Jeff has a house, great, we'll just shoot there. Take the time, and again, plan far enough in advance where you go to whatever residence this is, you check out the interior, you see, the color of the paint on the walls can affect you. Now, that aforementioned color correction issue I had was because we didn't take the time to say, what color are the walls that we're going to be shooting in? Because how light bounced off those walls ended up throwing a big old curveball. So take the time to scout your locations. Take the time if you need to make phone calls to locations, you do that, again, before you ever touch a camera. Because if you're thinking, okay, so we'll do this, and then I can call them in a couple of days after we get this stuff, something's always going to come up. And that location won't be available for whatever reason. So know exactly where you're shooting every day you're planning to shoot before you touch that camera. And your life will be so much better for it. We promise. Because we've been there. Can you remember a recent success story where planning saved the day?
Yeah, one of the circumstances that comes to mind was when we shot a pilot that we wrote and directed a couple summers ago. And one of the actors was under 18. And so that kind of also brings in child labor laws, and so like you can't keep, someone who's under 18 on set for as long as someone who's over 18, and all this comes into play. And this applies to like YouTube and stuff as well. As we're setting up, we realized that one of the props that we need for the scene, we didn't have. It could have thrown off our schedule if we hadn't budgeted in some cushion time for things just like this. We just kind of had someone on crew go and grab the prop from where it was. And in the meantime, we just did a little bit of, warm-up rehearsing with the actors. The prop got there, got to set, we shot the scene. And even with that, we were able to still finish within time. And everyone was able to go home when we promised them that they were gonna go home. Being able to budget in that extra time ahead of time during the pre-production phase really helped us out that day.
So when we were sort of talking about doing a segment like this, Sam, one particular student pitfall came to mind for you.
Yeah.
So why don't you clue us in on that?
Too much in too little. Too much stuff in too little of time. The reason it kind of stood out to me is because it's a place that I found myself during projects in school, and sometimes still have a tendency to like want to fall into, I've got 10 minutes to tell this story, and all of a sudden I'm wanting to add, more characters and more plot lines and just adding more to it because I'm excited and passionate about it, which is a great thing to be, a great place to be. But again, what ends up kind of happening, to go back to the planning thing, is it ends up not having the oomph and the punch and revealing the passion that you originally wanted to convey and communicate. Mm-hmm. The common phrase, less is more, right? And so, we see this in like Pixar shorts, right? It's kind of like a common example of they take a sort of simple story and they tell it well, and you understand what's going on, and there's not confusion about like who was the uncle that showed up in this scene and what was his role in the story, and why did the dog have to be a part of this, and all this type of stuff. And again, it just kind of allows you as well to really hone in on what is the story about? What is the story that I want to tell? And when you sort of get rid of a lot of the fog, which can be kind of difficult to do, because I think it's tricky to identify it as fog. You know, you think like, no, this is concrete. This is core to what the story is.
This is building a rich universe. This is attention to detail. This is...
Right, yeah.
Not really.
Right, yeah. And as painful and difficult as it is, you know, for us like writers to cut away, you know, our work, ultimately it will leave us with a product that is more clear and be able to hit the audience in a way that we want better.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talked about Pixar shorts, and they're incredibly ingenious at doing this, at involving as few little details as possible, because they take a very, very, very simple thing, as simple as humanly possible: birds sitting on power lines, or a boy and his grandfather sweeping up the moon. And they go through every single thing that can possibly happen in this scenario. So rather than branching out into all this, all these infinite possibilities that there are, they take something so simple that you think, oh, you can only do two things with that. Pixar proves you wrong, because they agonize over this very simple thing and show you every possible way that a boy can sweep up the moon, that birds can interact with each other on power lines, and it's just that.
Right.
The concept is very well contained. It's just exploring every single inch of that concept, and that's why they're excellent shorts. And you're going to be put into those time constraints, whether by, again, as students with, you know, a minute cap on your projects, or when you're first starting out because of resources. When you first strike out into the filmmaking world independent, you're not going to be able to shoot, you know, your 2.5-hour feature with the resources that are available to you immediately, unless you're very fortunate, in which case go forth, conquer, and live out the dream that most of us don't get to do. But for most of you guys, there's going to be some sort of hard cap on the number of minutes that you can generate. And that's frustrating, and I get it. I have been there with you, where you're like, what can I do in 4 minutes? You can't do anything in 4 minutes. But you must, and this is the way, that's the lens, sort of the point of view to take on to make that good and make it not a waste of time, is to, again, as simple a concept as possible, a well-defined concept with firm rules and walls, and explore every single possible thing that can happen within that small space. That's what's going to give you a great short product. And while you're doing all these shorts, either in the early stages of your, you know, independent filmmaking or in your school days, because, you know, again, it is a bummer. You want to do long form stuff. You want to create features, and you want to create, you know, shows. Write them. At the very least, write them. Get that stuff down on paper and ready for the minute that you've got the resources or the opportunity to do something larger like that. So don't squash that part of you. And one kind of wonderful thing about these small projects is they can be little micro laboratories for those larger ideas, where you've got this idea for a feature, you've got this idea for a show. It's a wonderful thing to go, okay, with that sort of Pixar frame of mind, how simple can I boil this larger idea down to? And if you're able to do that, your work will be so much more focused. It'll be so much more clear. It'll be easier to flesh out a universe, because you'll know exactly what at the core it's about, and you'll never lose sight of it because you already did it. Not only did you come up with it, write it down, you shot 5 minutes of pure concept for what you will soon turn into something larger, and you'll have that point of reference to come back to. So again, we feel your pain about the time constraint, but use it as an opportunity instead of this hurdle that you have to kind of, and don't think you're clever and can worm around of, oh yeah, I can totally fit in, you know, a full Sopranos family drama in 5 minutes. I mean, you might be more brilliant than we, and that wouldn't be too hard, but good luck to you, cousin. That's what I got for you.
Something I often find in scenarios where too much is put into too little time, again, from experience, is that we film it all, and we've kind of crammed as much in as we can into that 5-minute limit, and then we get into the editing room, and all of a sudden, there's no room for that joke to land. The joke goes, and you have to cut and move on to the next thing to make sure you're within the limit. Or with with a serious moment with drama, there's no time for that poignant word or moment to breathe, and so you lose the impact again that you're looking for.
And on drama, trying to fit too much and too little very quickly turns what you're doing into soap opera. It really does. I wrote a 38-page script. It was this very complex murder mystery with a sort of romantic betrayal and a red herring character who was sort of set up and framed and all this. It was way, way too much to fit into our rather brief limit. So instead of being this sort of intriguing what'll happen next, we had to pace this thing so dang fast, both on the page and in post, that it turned into a soap opera and it became ridiculous. It was like, oh my God, who isn't sleeping with who? Oh no, he wasn't the one the whole time. Every bit of intrigue and suspense was stripped away because we wanted to do far too much drama and far too much intrigue in way too short of a time.
Right. There wasn't room for intrigue and suspense.
Exactly. There was no room to make anyone wonder. It was just next detail, and that's what it turns into. Suddenly, your very brilliant, interweaving, complex idea turns into a list of details because you don't have any time for your characters to organically discuss and survive those details. It's just one thing happened. This detail becomes this detail, this detail, this detail, this detail, this detail, final detail, end.
Yeah. 5 minutes. Whew.
And you just go, wow, that was a lot of intense staring, off camera and speaking, because all of this is very interesting and complex, and that's all.
Right.
That's what happens to you when you try and fit too much. What would be much better. Let's see if we can, on the fly, fix this thing by boiling it down to its essential nature. So there was the romantic betrayal, a red herring, possible murderer, and the true murderer was among them the whole time. Perhaps a better way to boil this all down, instead of having to explore all of that history and deal with the present danger, what we could have done is cut straight to the chase and have this thing from the perspective of this guy who got away. And just follow this individual breaking the news that it was him the whole time. Because that's what it was. We set up a red herring. There was a death in the past that's now sort of being very accidentally, because we had no time, rediscovered. Instead of all of this, ducking and bobbing and weaving, what we could have done is gone from the perspective of this, murderer who wasn't caught, this wolf among them, and follow this individual in revealing that it was him. And we're dealing with all the same things, but instead of, again, having to jump through all these detail-oriented hoops, we go to the guts of the story, which is somebody got away and it was the wolf among them. And instead of rushing to what your concept is, instead of having to rush through details to this concept, you get to start with the concept and start immediately from minute one exploring the intricacies of this terribly exciting idea of there being a wolf among you. You have time, because you don't have to waste time getting to it. You have time to explore the intricacies of what it's like to have this uncaught murderer right next to you the whole time through their point of view. And sort of the little ironies of missing this sort of thing. And perhaps the incredible toll that it might take on this individual, which is a lot more interesting than a rushed murder mystery. So that would be sort of my end of perhaps a solution to doing too much and too little.
All right, so what is our next common mistake that we see?
The next one is taking zero, or at least very, very little account of production design. And what we mean by that is sort of a unity of what's being seen by the camera. And honestly, it unfortunately comes from, I think, incomplete advice from filmmaking teachers, because you're always advised as young or starting out filmmakers to make use of what you've got around you, to use the resources at hand. And so you do, and you go, okay, well, I've got some nice clothes, we'll do that, and my uncle's got a Jag, so we'll use that for a shot. And you do these things sort of without really unifying them together. Just kind of using things around you because you have them, and not very intentionally putting things together to make sure that it's serving your story, because above all else, the story is king. So for sort of an example, will be if you've got a character who's, I don't know, attending some sort of social function. They have to dress well for it. You just tell your actor, yeah, just bring the nice clothes you have and we'll pick. And so they bring like 17 hangers of things, and I'll kind of lay them out, and you go, yeah, this one right here. And taking very little account of what sort of formal or what sort of nice that is. I mean, is this person's formal wear sort of a conventional like slacks and a corded shirt? Is this person's formal wear something with a little more color? Are they someone who wears like a full-on tweed jacket? What sort of nice attire is it? And what does that say about this character? Because any clothing you put on this individual is going to define them for the audience. And if you don't do that carefully, and you just use whatever's around without considering it first, you're going to get in the editing room and go, why is this wrong? Why does this feel off? Why is my concept not coming through? So one easy way, it sort of ties back into when we were talking about failing to plan is planning to fail, is take full stock of every resource you have available. And I mean everything. Really lay out all of your options. Every location, every similar location that you could shoot this thing in. Okay, you need to be in an apartment. How many people's apartments do you have access to? List them out and consider carefully which one you're going to shoot in. As for, costuming, list out all the different permutations and look at all the permutations of what you have available to you from probably your actors or from yourself or your costumer or what have you. One pretty good resource for this kind of mindset is How to Make and Sell Your Film Online by Scott McMahon. He goes through pretty thoroughly how to take stock of everything you have and crafting your stories around what is available to you, and how you can make quality stories based on what may seem to you what little you have available to you, and what interesting stories can rise from those.
As you talk about clothing and apartments and stuff like that, it makes me think of asking the question, what kind of preferences does your character have? Let's say you make that list of your 18 or 5 apartments that you have access to. It's likely that each of those 5 apartments you walk into will have a different look and tone and feel about them. Mm-hmm. And you go, yes, like, Joe lives in this apartment. He has this type of couch, and he likes this type of artwork on his walls, and he dresses this way. Do the same thing with your characters. What type of couch would your character buy? What type of apartment would they live in? What would it look like? What type of clothes do they put on in the morning? To some extent, it should look different than the type of clothes your actor would put on in the morning.
Unless you did a really great job casting to type.
Sure.
In which case, you saved yourself time and money there.
Sure.
Now, you might be saying after all that, well, Keech and Sam, you're talking like we've got all these resources available to us on hand, and we've got all these options. Trust me, we know. We have been there before time and time again. In fact, half the time we shoot these days, we're still there. But you want to be as picky as possible with what you can. And even if it's between option A and option B, with Jackie's apartment or Jenny's apartment, or, a forest green or a off green, whatever an off green shirt is, you want to be as picky as you possibly can, as you can possibly afford to be. Because that's where Again, any one careless decision, especially with something that's going to appear on camera, any one careless decision can throw off a scene. Because you have such a, it's such a visual medium. You always hear about people saying, it's a visual medium, it's a visual medium. Well, it is. And so again, one offhand, oh, just do that choice, and an entire scene is just a little bit off. Because something was not chosen precisely because it matches as close as you can to the people in your universe.
Yeah.
So I'd like to, ever so gently and caringly as I can, drill something into the viewer's head. And it is this: darkness does not equal depth in your story. I'm going to say that again. Darkness does not equal depth in your story. Got it? Now Sam and I will talk about it. So Sam, do you agree or disagree that darkness does not equal depth in your story?
I absolutely agree. But I had to come to that understanding and realization.
As did I.
When I was a student, I was making films that had that sort of idea behind it. That the way to get that punch, the way to really grab the audience's attention and sort of show the sophistication of our story was to go with something dark.
Yeah, to make it, and the big two, and not to sound insensitive here, but it is the truth of filmmakers, the big two, the go-to darkeners and deptheners of story are cancer and suicide. Those are the two things that student film after film after film after film will have to do with cancer or terminal illness, vague terminal illness, worst of all, or a desire to take one's life. Don't think that your story has to be dark and morose and touching on death at all. To have some sort of insight, because it's not at all the case. In fact, there's so much more insight to be had about talking about a quality of life rather than death. Because once you die, you don't have to deal with the intricacies of life anymore. But if whatever idea you have somehow talks about a specific instance of life, about what happens to people commonly or maybe even extraordinarily, but if something has to do with their life and not their death, there could be so much to gain for an audience through that. Because usually, hopefully, your audience is living life. It's a pretty rare instance where you're projecting a film into a mausoleum. So what's so much more useful for your audience and what they can gain insight from is people living. Now, this isn't to discredit any sort of material that's about, deathly illness and will to not live anymore and things that have to do with death. Not to say that death isn't something you deal with. But don't require that to be your go-to. Again, the ever so favored shot of the college filmmaker, of the vague illness that makes you bleed out of one nostril as you stare into the depths of your demise.
I was in that shot.
See?
Yeah.
But another good reason why these sort of death-heavy topics won't work is, and it takes a bit of self-examination to realize this, you might be using them, and they are often used as we have observed, as just sort of, it's a calling card for depth. It's saying because terminal illness equals important. And that's by no means necessarily true. Unless you have a very personal relationship with these things, seek elsewhere. Seek elsewhere for your subject matter, because it will be ever so clear that these things are used as easy ins into depth and impactfulness. And because we can see their easy ins, it's going to land flat. And it's just a drag, man. You ever been in a cinema directing class, and you've got like 7 films about death and despair and desolation? Oh, knows me, we've all cranked our ISO way the hell down so everything looks so terribly dark. Like, at that point, I am begging for a clown tripping over a banana peel at that point in the class, man.
And oftentimes those are what actually end up winning.
Yeah, exactly. The curveball.
Yeah.
The only time we've ever seen a death-related thing take home the gold at the festival, we were both there. It was a comedy about death. It took death in a very whimsical and light sort of way. It was this, death shows up to claim this guy's soul, and he's an hour early because of daylight savings time. And so that's what it's about, and that's, the setup, and the rest of the film is about, well, what do you do when you have to hang out with death an hour before you die?
Right.
And the guy who he's coming to claim is this very carefully crafted character that's quirky and goofy and has a very different point of view on life itself. So that's the kind of, not that you have to go comedy with death, but if you have to you gotta come at it from the side, because we have seen the direct route to these death-related topics so many times, and we're gonna link to that particular film we just mentioned below. It's called YOLO. So shout out to Matt Schaub and Eric Zager and their masterpiece YOLO.
So you hear the phrase told a lot to writers: write what you know. And again, I think something that I've thought to myself, and maybe other film students are thinking to themselves: I'm out of high school, I'm in college, I don't feel like I know that much. I don't feel like I've experienced that much. So I don't feel like I have a story to tell. And so I feel like I have to go find these other stories that are more interesting.
And yeah, that's a big problem, is when you're starting out, or even if you've had a rather comfortable life, you're like, I haven't had that crazy upbringing that some other people have, that they make into these amazing biopics. What do I do? And the answer is broadening your definition of what you know. And really that can include what you like to see. Because chances are you like to watch stuff that maybe you haven't experienced firsthand, but there's something about it that you understand. Sort of in, that little bit of your soul, whatever that is. Because otherwise, how else could you explain any science fiction ever? Besides, like, To the Moon, but that was Fritz Lang way 90 years ago, before we knew that leaving the ground was a very, easy possibility. And there are airplanes when Fritz Lang was... Anyway. Also, if you don't know who I'm talking about with Fritz Lang, go look that up immediately. Know your history. But yeah, if you enjoy watching something, that's what you understand, probably. That's what you know. And that's honestly the best advice to somebody who doesn't have some crazy life story they can draw from. If you feel like, I don't know anything, well, then investigate not only what you watch, but the best question to ask yourself is, what do I want to see that isn't out there right now? Because again, if you have a great desire to see a specific story, chances are it's something you kind of understand already. And if you have that sort of at least desire to create, you're going to have a more vivid imagination towards it than some dark topic that's conventionally dark or conventionally deep or what have you. And that's the story that you can best tell, rather than going to one of the calling cards of depth. And you're going to have so much of a much better and more rewarding learning process than if you sort of go with the cookie cutter, edgy ideas. And so for our final little piece of advice, honestly, it's probably something that you, especially the film students, have experienced. Both not only committed this terrible sin in filmmaking, but you've witnessed this and can't quite understand why it happens so often. Is that, here's the scenario: you're sitting in your classroom and someone has just presented one of their short pieces. And you're polite, so you don't say this out loud, but the first thing that comes to your mind as a response to it is, could you have been more vague? And I've committed this sin myself with a ridiculous short film that I at least had the ironic sense to title in French. But we've all done it, where it's just like, that was, I guess, about what it was about. Like, I guess that had to do with death, or I guess that had to do with, like a need for speed, adrenaline, but that's it. And so if you find yourself in these situations, what this other filmmaker was missing, or what you might be missing, is specificity. And now, unfortunately, your teachers have probably told you time and time again, you have to be specific in your work, especially if you're an actor. You probably want to vomit on your own shoes now that you hear me saying you must be specific about your intention. Because believe me, in acting training, that is besides like respond to the truth of the room, that's the other most generic piece of acting teacher advice you'll ever hear in your life. But unfortunately, they're right. Just for some reason, they're not telling you how to do it. What you need to do is not just talk about a topic, but a very specific, a singular instance of this topic being applied. You can't just explore the topic. You have to go, okay, if I want to do something about adrenaline, an adrenaline junkie, or, the need for speed sort of instinct people have, what person in what set of circumstances can I fuel inject, this sort of, this need for speed into? And that is more or less your key.
I think you kind of see this in a show like Breaking Bad, right? So the sort of like vague, quick depth way to go is you have a character who has cancer, and that's where a lot of student films tend to go. But then you apply what you said, like who, in what circumstance, in what situation. You're like, all right, middle-aged man, married, son in high school, another one on the way. High school chemistry teacher, a little disappointed in, the way his career went and sort of where he is at in life. And then all of a sudden, this information hits him. How does that person respond?
Exactly.
And
that's it. How does that person respond to what's going on? Not just how does someone, the ethereal someone, respond? Yeah. How does this middle-aged man who is dissatisfied with what he did to make his mark on the world, with a family that he's responsible for, how does this person with responsibility and regret respond to this terrible news?
Yeah.
And that's what made Breaking Bad.
Right.
And that's what made it interesting, watching this, again, very average in a specific way, this very common to find person do what he did. And you go, wow, especially with the whole, he's compelled to make money because he's got to support his family, and he's compelled to do something. He's compelled to build his power once he finds that he does have power in this realm of meth making.
Yeah.
He's compelled to build and continue building his power because of his dissatisfaction.
Right.
So not only is this specificity going to make your film better, it's going to make it easier to write. It's going to make it easier to make, because if you have a specific individual with a specific circumstance that's dealing with whatever you want to write your film about, their response is going to be obvious.
Right.
You're not going to have to rack your brain about what clever way can I show this person dealing with this sort of thing? What clever way can I find to force him into a life of crime? It's going to be very, very clear and very, very easy for you to go, well, duh, that's how Walter White starts making meth.
Right.
Of course, because he's got a family to provide for, he knows chemistry, and he's got this burning ambition under him that he never got to fulfill. Easy.
Right.
The story writes itself.
And we do this type of storytelling quite easily and fluidly, quite often with our friends. When you kind of take a step back and look at your friends and how specifically you know them. You go like, walking through the store, you go, Keach would wear that shirt, or whatever. Get to know your characters just as well.
Yep. Get to know your characters as you would your friends.
You'll be spending a lot of time with them.
Yeah. Hey, sometimes more time than you spend with your friends.
True. Right.
The way in for specificity I usually take, not just with concepts into execution for a story, but even down to, what needs to be the result of a scene to move the damn plot, and how my characters are going to do that, and try and figure out exactly what circumstance would affect it uniquely. So with the Walter White example, this looming demise was interesting because of his responsibility especially. So if you're trying to figure out, okay, we'll stay on the death thing, even though we told you not to write about death, but if you must write about impending death, then try and find exactly why impending death is important. Impending death would be rather unfortunate on someone who just got a new lease on life or a big second chance. That isn't, instead of just like, oh, death is very sad when it's coming upon you, but somebody who just got their second shot, say it's someone who just got out of prison, just got a terrible diagnosis. That is interesting to look at because there's going to be a huge amount of feelings about just having gotten the second shot and now it's being taken away immediately. That is something interesting rather than just some lonely person who's, loneliness and death, those go hand in hand. Loneliness and death are so uninteresting. Loneliness and death go together, and that's why they're uninteresting. Companionship and death are interesting to put together. Possibility and aspirations and death are interesting to go together. Put these opposing, and that's where you'll find a lot of these interesting individuals to put in these concepts, is find what opposes the concept most thoroughly. And that will make for an interesting story. Because, hey, you've got built-in conflict.
Yeah, absolutely.
And conflict is the heart of storytelling, as every single filmmaking, writing professor will ever tell you, and you're going to get sick of it, and you probably hate me for saying it.
Yeah.
But at least this way we're talking about it in some sort of specific way, instead of just saying, have conflict in your story.
Right.
I hope that you can take from this that when your teachers, inevitably, because they do, kind of splout? That's a new word.
Yeah.
Use that in a screenplay. I don't know. Take it. I don't have it copyrighted. But when they spout these generalities, be more specific, have more conflict, challenge them and go, how do I do that? Exactly how do I do that? Mm-hmm. And then, because they're probably going to give you an example based on the story you presented with them, don't get offended when they give you an idea for what happens next in your story. Because believe me, I think you and I have both been there where teachers like, well, this should really happen next. And you're like, ooh, how dare you? No, I don't want it to happen that way.
Right, yeah.
It's not that they want you to do the story their way. They're pointing you towards an instance with more conflict. So you don't have to do exactly that example, but look at what comprises their suggestion. Okay, why did he say that he should tell her he loves her on page 5 instead of page 75? What about him telling her he loves her in that situation creates more conflict? And find what's fundamentally there. Is it confronting his fear? That's why it's exciting. Is it taking a chance? Is that why it's exciting? Is it totally misreading the situation and taking, kind of a dark one, sort of valuing himself over her in that moment? Because maybe it's a terrible time to tell him he loves her. Is that what's interesting? That he's doing something selfishly without knowing it? Figure out what these suggestions are at their core so that you can use them for your own creativity and not just feel like, oh, I'm such a schmuck because I've used a teacher's suggestion, which we all hate doing, and we instantly get our hackles up when it happens.
Yeah.
So let's put 60 seconds on the clock, and let's fire off just the little stuff that comes to mind, the anything that student filmmakers run across. So ready, and you start, go.
Be specific about who you cast and who's on your crew. Why are you casting them? Is it because they are right and fit for the part? Why are they on camera or hair and makeup or whatever it is? Be specific about that.
Yeah. Have enough crew, because there's nothing worse than 2 people doing everything that isn't behind a camera. Hair and makeup, don't just give it to a girl because it's a girl on the team. That's just a dick move.
Everything takes at least twice as long as you think it does.
Yes.
So budget at least twice as long as you think it'll take. And you'll be happy for it.
Do not disregard lighting and think you can just use the natural light in the room or the light fixtures that are in the room. Bring lights for the love of the Lord. And that is 60 seconds. So, yeah, thanks so much for hanging with me and Sam and hearing what you've been doing wrong all your film school life.
We've all done it. We've all been there.
It's why we can talk about it to you today.
We have our tendencies to fall back into those patterns every so often and have to remind ourselves to pull ourselves out of that direction.
Yep.
So
anyway, thanks everybody.
Thanks for watching. I hope this information has been helpful in your pursuit of tools for storytelling. If it has, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.